Long before the world knew the name James Vanderbeek, there was simply a restless kid growing up in Cheshire, Connecticut, a town quiet enough that dreams had room to echo loudly inside a teenager's mind. He wasn't born into Hollywood privilege, industry connections, or a famous last name. His father worked in business, his mother in dance and gymnastics instruction, and together they raised a child who had energy that never seemed to switch off. Sports were supposed to be his future, soccer especially. For years that was the plan, until an injury abruptly ended it. That moment mattered more than anyone around him realized. When sports disappeared, something else had to fill the silence. Acting became that replacement almost by accident. A school production, a few local performances, then small stage opportunities. What began as a distraction quickly became an obsession. Acting gave him control, a strange kind of control for someone still figuring out who he was. On stage, he could be confident, emotional, brave, even broken, all safely contained within a character. By his mid-teens, he was commuting to New York for auditions. Imagine that contrast. Weekdays in suburban classrooms, weekends competing against trained performers twice his age. He didn't always win roles. In fact, he lost most of them. But rejection slowly built a skill more valuable than talent: persistence. At 17, he landed an off-Broadway part. Not glamorous, not headline-making, but real. For the first time, he saw professional actors treating performance not as fantasy, but as survival. Rent depended on it. Reputation depended on it. Discipline mattered more than raw ability. That lesson stayed with him long after the applause faded. Then came television auditions in the late 1990s, a period when teen dramas were about to reshape American pop culture. Networks were hunting for faces that looked authentic rather than polished. They wanted vulnerability, awkward sincerity, someone audiences would believe as a kid still trying to understand adulthood. He walked into an audition room and read for a show called Dawson's Creek. No one could predict what would happen next. The character, Dawson Leary, wasn't a typical TV heartthrob. He cried a lot. He overthought everything. He romanticized life like a filmmaker narrating his own existence. Many actors might have tried to make the role cooler than written. Instead, Vanderbeek leaned into the sincerity, almost painfully sincere. That choice changed television history in a way that only becomes obvious years later. When the show premiered in 1998, it didn't just succeed, it became a cultural ritual. Teenagers discussed episodes at school the next day. Adults watched secretly and pretended they didn't. The doc conversations, the philosophical speeches, the awkward vulnerability, all of it turned Dawson into a symbol of emotional adolescence. But fame came faster than identity could adapt. Overnight, he went from unknown stage actor to the face of a generation. Magazine covers, interviews, public appearances. Yet the strange thing about sudden celebrity is that people begin confusing the character with the person. Viewers didn't just like Dawson, they believed James was Dawson. And that misunderstanding quietly built a pressure he couldn't easily escape. While the series was exploding, Hollywood came calling with film roles. The most famous arrived in 1999, Varsity Blues. The movie presented a completely different persona: confident, rebellious, charismatic. For many young audiences, this was the first moment they realized the emotional TV dreamer could also play swagger convincingly. But success has a strange side effect. It locks perception into place. Studios didn't want versatility, they wanted reliability. The industry labeled him a teen idol, and labels in Hollywood act like invisible contracts. Casting directors began seeing him less as an actor and more as a type: romantic lead, sensitive boy, emotional speech giver. Inside, he was still the theater kid who liked experimenting. Outside, he was becoming a brand. The early 2000s intensified the problem. Internet culture began rising, and with it came a moment that would follow him for decades: the crying scene screenshot that evolved into the crying Dawson meme. Suddenly, his most vulnerable performance turned into global comedy shorthand. Millions laughed at an image disconnected from context. For a young actor still forming self-confidence, that cuts deeper than criticism. It reshapes how strangers see you forever. Instead of fighting it publicly, he absorbed it quietly. Work slowed, offers narrowed, the industry moved toward edgier realism, and teen drama stars often struggled to transition. He kept acting, guest roles, smaller projects, but the overwhelming spotlight faded into something stranger, recognition without relevance. Then, years later, he did something unexpected. Rather than resisting the joke, he embraced it. In Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, he played an exaggerated version of himself, insecure, self-aware, hilariously narcissistic. It was a risk. Actors are taught to protect image, not parody it. But the gamble worked. Audiences saw humor, humility, and honesty. The same image that once trapped him became the key that freed him. For the first time since his early 20s, viewers weren't watching Dawson Leary anymore. They were watching James. And ironically, that self-parody restored respect inside the industry. He continued appearing in projects like CSI Cyber and Pose, building a career less explosive but more stable. Not every role was huge, but each was intentional. He also stepped outside scripted acting entirely, competing on Dancing with the Stars, showing audiences a relaxed personality they rarely saw during his teen idol era. But behind the professional reinvention was another life unfolding quietly: marriage, fatherhood, and a growing distance from Hollywood's constant attention. For years, he had lived in public. Now he was learning how to live in reality. And that difference between the person people thought they knew and the man building a private family life would eventually become the most important story of all. By the time the loudest phase of fame faded, James Van Der Beek had entered a chapter that most former teen stars either avoid or never reach: ordinary adulthood. Not ordinary in the financial or public sense, but emotionally ordinary. Marriage, responsibility, and eventually 6 children. The spotlight that once defined him slowly became background noise, while fatherhood became the center of his daily rhythm. He moved his family away from constant Hollywood visibility, choosing privacy over proximity to studios. That decision confused some fans. Actors are expected to chase exposure, not distance from it. But for him, exposure had always come with misunderstanding. Fame had introduced him to millions, yet rarely allowed them to know him accurately. At home, he wasn't Dawson, not a meme, not a former teen idol, just a dad making breakfast, doing school runs, and worrying about bills like everyone else. Yes, bills. One of the quiet truths about long careers in entertainment is instability. Even recognizable actors can face unpredictable income gaps between projects. Residuals shrink, roles fluctuate. The public assumes lifelong wealth. Reality often means careful budgeting. He spoke openly in interviews about financial pressure during certain years, explaining that career longevity doesn't guarantee permanent security. That honesty made him relatable in a way celebrity mystique never could. But the greatest shift in his public identity came when he began talking about industry culture during the rise of the #MeToo movement. Instead of staying silent, he described his own experiences witnessing uncomfortable behavior in Hollywood's power structures. It wasn't sensational or attention-seeking, it was reflective. He talked about how young performers, especially at the start of sudden fame, often lack control over professional environments. For someone once marketed as the face of teenage innocence, speaking about uncomfortable realities marked a major personal evolution. Around this time, audiences noticed something. He wasn't trying to reclaim the exact career peak he had at 20. He was reshaping success into something sustainable. Guest roles, voice work, independent productions, and selective appearances on shows like Pose allowed him to act without surrendering family stability. Then, life interrupted everything. The diagnosis arrived quietly: Stage 3 colorectal cancer. Illness has a strange effect on public figures. The distance between celebrity and audience collapses instantly. But before the public knew, there was a far more difficult conversation happening at home. telling 6 children their father was seriously sick. He later described the moment as the hardest performance of his life because there was no script and no character to hide inside. Children don't hear statistics the way adults do. They hear uncertainty. Explaining treatment, hospital visits, and physical weakness required honesty balanced carefully with reassurance. The role he once played for television, guiding young people through emotions, now became real inside his own house. Treatment meant time away from work and increasing medical costs. In a move that surprised many, he auctioned personal memorabilia, including items connected to Dawsons Creek, to raise funds supporting families facing cancer treatment. It wasn't just symbolic, it showed how differently he viewed his past. The same props that once defined his image were now tools helping others survive reality. Fans responded not with nostalgic obsession, but respect. The narrative around him shifted from former heartthrob to resilient father. During interviews, he avoided dramatizing his condition. Instead, he spoke about perspective. Fame teaches you how many people recognize you. Illness teaches you how many truly support you. Messages arrived from viewers who had grown up watching him decades earlier, now adults with families of their own. Many shared their own medical struggles. The relationship between actor and audience matured into mutual understanding rather than admiration. Physically, the treatments were exhausting. Chemotherapy changes routine completely, sleep patterns, energy levels, even identity. Yet he continued appearing occasionally in public conversations, not to reassure fans, but to normalize vulnerability. He explained that strength isn't pretending everything is fine. Strength is allowing people to see difficulty without losing hope. For years, he had lived a double life in a different sense, the confident character people remembered versus the reflective person evolving privately. Cancer erased the separation. There was no performance left, only authenticity. On February 11th, news broke that he passed away at 48. The reaction online was immediate, but unusually personal. Instead of only clips from Varsity Blues or the famous crying scene, people shared interviews, family photos, and quotes about fatherhood. The image audiences chose to remember wasn't Dawson standing on a dock, it was a man standing beside his children explaining courage. His story ultimately became less about early fame and more about growth after it. Many actors spend careers protecting image. He spent later years dismantling his. By acknowledging mistakes, laughing at his past persona, speaking honestly about industry discomforts, and confronting illness publicly yet calmly, he reshaped what celebrity aging could look like. The double life people once imagined, star versus private individual, turned out not to be deception, but evolution. He wasn't hiding who he was discovering it slowly while millions watched only fragments. And in the end, audiences didn't lose a character.